Conversations with Garmamie. We have a special guest on here today, which you've seen many, many a times. His name is Tony Walby. How are you doing, Tony?
Great. Yourself?
I'm doing great, Tony. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself and your history in the sport of judo.
Okay. Well, I'm a fifth degree black belt in judo. I've been training for 40 years. I'm a 12-time national medalist and national champion on the able-bodied side. I spent 20 years on the able-bodied national team. I lost my sight late in life and spent 6 years on the para judo team, attending two Paralympics on Canada's behalf. I am the current Canadian Paralympic Committee Athlete Council Chair, and I sit on the Canadian Paralympic Committee's Board of Directors. I also sit on the Board of Directors for the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports, which is Canada's anti-doping agency, and I'm the competitor coach and sensei at the Takahashi Dojo.
Now, Tony, speak to us on the return to judo guidelines and safety protocols, and how is training judo safe under COVID-19 at your dojo?
So Judo Canada came up with a national guideline for return to judo. Judo Ontario took that national guideline and enhanced it for the specifics of Ontario's provincial health authority. And our dojo has taken Judo Ontario's guideline of return to judo, and we've enhanced it to make it even safer and more in line, and modified it specifically for our dojo. So at Takahashi Dojo, we have a big wide open space of mat areas, and we have segregated those areas, not physically segregated them, but segregated them with different objects on the mat for students. So when you come into our dojo, each student is given roughly a 3-foot by 6-foot area that is their area for the full class. And there's a hook in the wall at their area for them to hook up uchikomi bands. They have a clean sight line to the sensei who's instructing the class. And we are allowed 10 students on the mat at one time. That includes the instructor. So we are segregated and we are training solo. There's no contact work at all being done. So there's no partner work, but the instruction that the sensei is giving is all done with uchikomi bands, with judo dummies, which is a big 6-foot stuffed martial arts dummy. We are also doing a little bit more lecturing during the class. At the end of each class, all equipment and all hard surfaces are sanitized. The mats are mopped. The railings, the chairs, anything that was used during that class is cleaned, ready for the next class to come in.
Now, in terms of accountability, how do you guys ensure that people don't show up sick at the dojo?
So they're just like schools. There's a questionnaire that we ask the participants to go through before they come to the dojo. If they have any symptoms, to stay home, obviously. When they get to the dojo, there's hand sanitizer the minute they come into the dojo, and then there's hand sanitizer available to them throughout the class if they wish. We are keeping attendance of every class, and we're doing contact tracing just in case somebody were to tell us after the fact that they were asymptomatic and they tested positive. That has not happened, but we are keeping attendance for contact tracing. We have contact information on every student, as they have a waiver they must fill in that gives us their contact information. And if any student exhibits a symptom during the class, we isolate them. And if it's the youth class, we call their parents right away to come get them. If it's the adult class, we ask them to leave. We are being very, very strict on this. So we are also, our students are green belt and above only right now. For the youth class, they're 12 years old to 16 years old and green belt and above. For the adults, they're green belt and above and over the age of 16. And these are students that we've known for a very long time. And we have the trust and I guess the best word is trust. We have the trust that they would not come to the dojo if they're exhibiting any symptoms, but also the senseis on the mat are looking for those symptoms if they exist.
Very interesting. How are people reacting to this? What sort of feedback are you getting from the community, your students, and fellow judo players?
So we've been back on the mat now since the first week of August, and our students are just loving it. They're loving the fact that they have a judo gi on again, that they're on the mat. There's the physical aspect to it, but there's also the mental, the emotional aspect to it as well. They're seeing it's been at that point it was 5 months since we've seen our students. Some of our students are just coming back now as well as they feel safer with the measures that are in place. So some of them have been 6, 7 months without any judo or any contact with the judo community. So they're loving being back on the mat. They're loving getting a workout. They're loving that camaraderie that we've had for so long, that they're back. Um, right now, my adult students are mainly blue and brown belts and a few black belts. We don't have any green belts on the mat right now. The youth class has some green belts, some blue belts, some brown belts on the mat. With the youth class, we have 3 senseis in place, one teaching the class, one is there at the beginning of class to meet them at the door, social distance to ensure that they use the hand sanitizer, that one student goes up at a time and goes straight onto the mat and goes to their assigned area. And the third sensei is in the office area, and he is taking the attendance as they go onto the mat. So very distanced out, very socially distanced out, but ensuring that all of the guidelines are being followed from Judo Ontario, and we are enhancing them just a little bit more to make sure that our students are safe.
With these new guidelines, can you give us a quick summary of how a class is run?
Okay, so I teach the adult classes, so I'll give you a very brief description of how the adult class is run. So the adult class starts at 8 o'clock. So the students are asked to not show up at the dojo any earlier than 5 to 8. And this is because the youth class ends at 7:45, and the youth class are very quickly being ushered out of the dojo one at a time, distanced, and then the adult class can come into the dojo after the youth class has gone and gotten their rides. So the adult class comes in, they're assigned an area on the mat. They bring all of their stuff onto the mat with them. They're asked they must arrive in their judo gi. So then they must bring their jackets and their judo bags and their water bottles and their towel onto the mat with them into their little area. From there, we do a quick solo warm up. Once the whole class is there, we do a bow in together. Then we do a quick warm up. From that point, there's a number of different exercises that we use the uchikomi bands with for technique and position and balance. From that, we may do some newaza with. I ask everybody to bring an empty or an extra gi top. With the gi top, the extra gi top, we do some newaza, osai waza, which are hold downs. I then do a demonstration on the judo dummy that we have, and then the judo dummy is passed around from area to area, being sanitized after every student uses it for them to get the experience of almost a full body to do the technique. We then do a cool down and single file out of the dojo with a couple of students staying behind to mop the mats and sanitize the areas.
How is this let's say someone just started training judo in August, right? Let's say they're a white belt, they're a beginner. How is this sort of training differ from the traditional approach of training? And what are, you think, some of the pros and cons purely in terms of developing judo skill? What are the pros and cons under this new sort of reality?
So I
For
guess you're at,
beginners, for beginners.
so it right now we don't have a beginner class in place. This is something the senseis have discussed putting together. A beginner class would be much more difficult for somebody brand new to the sport of judo to come in. we would be able to teach them the ukemi, the break falls, but they would not be able to join the adult class as it sits today.
Okay.
We would have to have a separate beginner class for them to start teaching the basics and the fundamentals of judo. Judo is a very, very complex sport and martial art that requires uh, many years to get to a level of proficiency. A beginner coming in, learning the very fundamentals and the basics without any partner work would be very, very difficult. We are trying to put together that lesson plan now so that hopefully in the coming months we can start having a beginner class to teach them judo fundamentals. But the silver lining in judo right now with this type of training for a more advanced student, this is why we've limited our class to green belt and above, is that they have the judo fundamentals that we can actually build upon. It is very difficult to build judo fundamentals without partner work, to get the feel for judo, to get the kumikata, the grip, to understand positioning. That is very, very difficult and very, very hard to do with just uchikomi bands. You actually need to have a physical body for that. The judo dummy could help in that respect with being able to hook it up on the wall and allowing the beginner to grip that and do some movement with that. But again, this is something that we are discussing at the instructor level, trying to put together a very good lesson plan. So when we have new beginners join the club, we can have a much smaller 2 to 3 student class of just beginners where we can show them the fundamentals and they can start to learn the ukemi, the break falls, some of the kumikata grips, and some of the positions for very basic throws and hold downs. But again, this would be very, very difficult without having partner work. So we're trying to put that lesson plan together. But as I said, right now with the green belts, blue belts, brown belts, and black belts that we have on the mat, the silver lining for them is that they get the extra time to work on their balance, to work on their technical position, to work on their fundamentals, to make them stronger, to build them up. I'm finding over the last couple of months that a lot of the students are getting better fundamentals, are getting better position and balance, and they're not hurrying their technique up and making mistakes as they would do with some partner work. Because let's face it, when you're doing technique on a partner, you're sometimes battling their strength, your strength, and you're doing stuff off balance very quickly, and you form some very bad habits. I know myself, I have some very bad habits that are being corrected now that there is no partner work, and I'm able to just work on form, position, technique, balance. I'm thinking that this, when we do get back to partner work, will greatly improve a lot of my competitors and just the judo in general for my students.
What has how has this impacted in terms of, like, the dojo being a community, quote unquote? How has the initial lockdown impacted that, and what does it mean for your community to be able to be back at their dojo doing what they love?
So our dojo is like one big family. All the students, we know each other really, really well. A lot of us have been there for many, many years. Like I said, I've been doing judo for 40 years. I've been at that dojo for 40 years. So a lot of our students have been there for a very, very long time. And well, we missed each other. Let's just put it blankly. We missed each other. We missed the communication with each other. The dojo and myself and other senseis have reached out to the students throughout the pandemic via email, sometimes via phone. But it's not the same as seeing each other in person and chatting and getting the gi back on and just feeling like a little bit of normalcy is back in your life, because that's what was missing for a lot of them. A lot of them, judo was their stress release, was their escape from school or work or just the daily grind. And now, once the pandemic hit, they were locked out of judo. A lot of them locked out of school, some of them locked out of work. and just being locked in their home and not being able to see or do anything really increased their stress level, and their one stress release, which was judo, was taken away from them. So now that they're back, they're able to burn off some steam. They're able to work on the judo. They're able to just to chat and socialize in a very safe, social distance environment. It's very big for them, and I've seen it over the last 8 weeks that we've been back on the mat. I've seen the stress level in my students go down. I've seen smiles and laughter come back to them. I've talked to most of them on the phone during the lockdown, and a lot of them were, I'm not going to say they were depressed, because they weren't depressed, but they were feeling down that they couldn't do judo, that they couldn't see anybody or really socialize. So I've seen that go away, and I've seen a general happiness back in them.
Now, as you were mentioning, you can't do any partner work, so there's no randori. But from what I recall of seeing you in training, you're a very fiery character on the mat. When you step on the mat, especially in randori, it's awesome to witness. You're very intense, very focused, and very alert. Describe to us the vibe in the dojo during Randori Night, and characterize it for those who may have never witnessed that sort of energy.
So
and on top of that, tell us what you missed the most about pre-COVID-19 judo.
So for those of you, like, Randori is basically fighting. It is where we get together and we actually just do a full night of 12 to 16 rounds, 5-minute rounds of just changing partners and fighting each other. Everybody misses that, because it's their chance to just go really hard, really safe, to learn, to get better, to just fight with an opponent that is better than them, and try to increase their proficiency at judo. At our club, our Randori Nights, we had visitors from other clubs in the region every Randori night, from Gatineau, from the RA Center, from Canada. Just they meet up at our club, and we just go at it. We have a really good, strong night. And like you said, yes, I get fired up. I get fired up every time I'm on the mat, whether I'm teaching, whether I'm sparring, whether I'm running a conditioning class. If I get fired up, I can fire up the rest of them, and it's a great feeling to be on the mat during Randori, because I usually train when I'm doing Randori. My opponent doesn't matter, because my goal as a coach is for all of the fighters that show up to throw me. If they can throw me, they've gotten better, and I'm happy. But I go as hard as I can against them to give them that level of, this is where I want you to get to. So that is being missed. That is greatly being missed, because we're not having the visitors from other clubs come to our classes right now. We're not fighting, because there's no partner work being done. So we're not ramping each other up. We're not getting that intensity of Randori in. The students are losing that part of it. But having said that, the intensity and my fiery attitude is still there during all the other classes. So when I teach a technical class, I'm on my students to make sure that their form is correct, that their technique is correct, that they're not dogging it, that they're pushing themselves as hard as they can go. When we do a conditioning class, it's the same thing. It's as if I don't shut up at all during the class. I'm always just pushing and pushing and pushing them, and at the same time pushing myself. So I am usually the oldest one on the mat, and when we get to a training session, technical session, I'm not the oldest one on the mat. We have students straight into their 70s at the club, but when we get to a conditioning class or Randori class, I'm usually the oldest on the mat, and I'm pushing myself too. So I guess what I missed the most, and you've asked that, what I missed the most of those nights, is the ability to push myself against a younger, stronger, faster opponent, just to see if I can still catch them. And when they catch me, to just have a little bit of pride that even some of the visitors that join our club, they're still students of mine when it comes to competition training, because they're there for Randori Nights, but they show up again for my competitor classes. So I always have that sense of pride when I get caught by one of my students.
Yeah, and you know the intensity is certainly it's awesome to witness, you know, and I think it really motivates, as you're saying, it motivates your students, regardless if they're, you know, beginners, recreationalists, or people who have ambition to compete regionally, you know, provincially, and so on. If they have that, if they have the skill and the desire to go further, of course, I think that intensity, I think, instills quite the level of dedication, and I've witnessed you on the mats, whether you're coaching or you're fighting, and it's awesome to see, you know. And like, even if I can stick on this topic for a second, like I remember going back on some audio recordings that I have of you from years ago when you were training, and just, you know, just, and this is just audio, just hearing the voices and the sounds in the dojos, and just the bodies hitting the mats, you know, when you're throwing, it's there's a real magic and fire there, I think, within the sport of judo, that as a fan myself, as a spectator, of course, you know, whether you're watching competition and so on, I find is really it's outstanding, you know, when you talk about fighting spirit and just the combat nature of judo, if I can say that. Now, Tony, I want to throw so I hope you keep being intense, because we all love that intensity. I want to ask you a question in regards to, this is a bit broader and it applies to not just judo but other sports slash businesses, quite frankly. How has this pandemic disrupted the martial arts community, not just in Ottawa but across the country? How has it disrupted the business of martial arts and judo? And what would you say we've learned so far from this very challenging chapter? What's the takeaway for this industry?
So this actually is affecting every single sport, not just judo or martial arts, but um, I guess this answer could be answered for almost every club-based sport. Uh, the majority of clubs in Canada are volunteer-based. They're not for-profit clubs. There are a few clubs in the country that are for-profit, that are businesses to be run for profit. Those clubs are hurting, as are even the ones that are run by volunteers. You gotta think, if you're a club and you don't own your building, or you don't own your space, or you rent your space, so now you have rent to cover. In Ontario, you're limited to 10 students on a mat, and that includes the instructor. So now you're limited to 9 paying students at a time. If you rent your space, you're renting your space by a certain hour or for a length of time, or even if you rent your space permanently, the number of classes you have to run just to meet your rent or to meet your overhead is going to be enormous with only 9 students at a time. That's for one. For two, the number of senseis you're going to have, because the same person is not going to be able to continuously run 4 classes a night. So you're going to have more volunteer instructors. On top of that, you're looking at spaces that are being rented in community centers or churches are not being rented right now. So community centers and churches are not renting out their space for sports. So those clubs are closed. So that means there's no revenue being generated. If the mats are being stored at those areas, you still have to pay for the storage space. It is hurting a lot of sports. It's hurting a lot of martial arts. It's hurting judo. Depending on where you're located, there's different rules and different guidelines. In Ontario, if you are a dojo for judo, Judo Ontario has said that we're not a gym. Under their guidelines, we are not a gym. We are an instructional institution, very similar to a cooking class. So we can continue to operate right now. But if you're in Quebec, in Montreal, or in Gatineau, Judo Quebec is not considering their clubs instructional institutions. They're considering their clubs gyms, and their clubs are closed. I have a friend that owns a club in Montreal. His club is wrestling, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and personal training, and that's his livelihood. And right now it's closed. I have a feeling that we are going to see a lot of small clubs that were run by volunteers gone when this pandemic is over. And on top of all of this, our students are still required to pay their Judo Ontario membership fees. So even though a lot of judo players are not doing judo right now, they're still required to pay their fees with Judo Ontario. If they don't, then and they're a black belt, it could impact their next grading or when they come back or their points between. A lot of things can get shuffled in. So there's still an out-of-pocket expense, even though a lot of people are not training. At our club, we are running classes, and we are, to my knowledge, keeping our head above water. But again, we have 9 students on the mat for our youth class, 9 students on the mat for our adult class. We are running 2 adult cohorts, so 2 different adult classes and 2 different youth classes. So really, we're only teaching 36 total students right now. And that is not, we could add more classes, but we don't have more students coming back to us yet. Because again, we've limited this to the different ranks and the different age groups. Our children's class is not running. The 6 to 11-year-old class is not running. Our Pee-wee class, which is 4 or 5-year-olds, is not running. And all of that is out of safety concerns. So yeah, it is impacting a lot. And just on this topic, the parliamentary secretary for sport has had many town halls over the last week, and one of them was on grassroots recreational sports and how do we support them. The government of Canada doesn't have an answer yet. We've also had a town hall on high performance sport, which I attended, and the biggest problem right now is, this is a different topic, but the biggest problem right now is that with our high performance athletes preparing for Tokyo next summer, other countries are treating this as if there's been no pandemic, and they're training as hard as they can, and they've been training all along. Our national team is training, but they're training in a bubble. They're training only with each other on the team and with a couple of designated training partners that stay within their bubble. They're not going to international training camps. They don't have the high level number of bodies on the mat. They're doing everything as safe as they can do under the Canadian guidelines. So they're not leaving the country unless it's to go to a qualifying event. We're really hamstringed, whereas other countries are not. So this came up at the town hall with the parliamentary secretary on sport, Adam Vancouverian, and really there's no solution to that problem, because the government and the national sporting organizations are not willing to put their athletes at risk, and I applaud them for that.
Yeah, the safety of these practitioners, these athletes, regardless of sport, is definitely key. But before we and I want to ask you more about your opinion on international judo and the impact of for Canadian for members of the national team. Before we go there, and again, I'm asking you to speculate here in regards to how things will go, assuming, let's say, this quote unquote lockdown continues for another year. Let's say it runs till fall 2021. What do you see what will the state of club judo be nationally in this country in terms of number of dojos that are operating and the level of participation, particularly with youth judo?
Well, personally, I think we're going to be in big trouble. I think we're going to retain a number of students that are of higher rank. And I think we're going to have to start over in building up not only new clubs, but new students. I think a lot of clubs will have dissolved. A lot of clubs will have disappeared. A lot of students would have moved on to other activities that were accessible in that time frame. Uh, and especially students that have just started in the youth, that were white, yellow, orange, and even green belts that had just started judo within the last 2 years, and don't really have a huge connection or time commitment put in already, may move on, may drop it, because they'll be coming back and they'll be almost starting over for a lot of them. And I mean, white, yellow, orange belts will all be starting over, um, pretty much, because their fundamentals would have been lost. They would not have had the time to work, to build, to strengthen them. So I honestly think we are going to lose a large percentage of those lower belt students, and we will have to start over in building up our memberships across the country. It'll be different in every region because every region has had different access to their clubs and to their students. Um, but it's going to be rough. It's not going to be business as usual. And even when it gets back to business as usual, I think we've learned a lot of lessons from just the short period that we've been back on the mat, that we are going to have to build better communication, better connection to all of our students, to just keep them engaged, whether they're on the mat or off the mat. And that's going to be true for all sports. My daughter is in hockey, and hockey here in Ottawa has restarted, but there's a lot less people playing. So her team is made up of 11 young girls, and they're on the ice practicing. But in previous years, there would be 18, 19 girls on that team, or at least 16 girls on that team and two goalies. So uh, things are hurting. Parents are keeping their kids out of sport for fear, uh, for not understanding the protocols that are in place. So I really think that if this goes on for a year or 2 years, and it just might, that the state of sport in Canada is going to be hard to recover from, and it's going to be a long road to recover from. And judo in particular, 2 years without partner work, 2 years where students just use uchikomi bands, and the youth just play some games on the mat, and never have contact. They're going to get bored. They're going to lose interest. They're going to disappear. And when all of the senseis at my club got together to discuss lesson plans for youth classes, the number one thing on the top of the list of every lesson plan is make it fun, make it interesting, make it engaging. Otherwise, we know we're going to lose these teenagers. With adults, we don't have to make it fun. We have to make it challenging. Um, Adults are there for a different reason than youth are there. Adults can push themselves, can motivate themselves. A lot of youth don't have that self motivation. So it is our job as senseis to motivate them and keep it fun and interesting. And a lot of clubs across the country have different protocols in place. And I'm not privy to lesson plans outside of my own club, so I can't tell you what other clubs are doing. But just speaking to other instructors across North America through different social media, it is extremely challenging. And that's just the judo aspect of it. We also have to think the financial aspect of it when it comes to students. A lot of the students' parents have either lost their job due to COVID, or somebody in their household has lost their job, or their finances have been more restricted. So just paying club dues becomes secondary, and the kids will be pulled out of sport, not just judo, but other sports because of that. So this is a domino effect. It's not just the pandemic affecting dojos and access to dojos. It's a pandemic affecting all of Canadians and all of families and their finances, and how uh, disposable income and sports becomes a luxury, and one that they can do without for the time being.
Really interesting. I think this is, I mean, for all sports and all businesses, I think there's a lot of potential potential, new ways to conduct business for some who can pivot online, of course, as everyone's using that word pivot. But for some other businesses, it might completely change their landscape potentially. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I asked about the youth demographic because I think that in terms of within the judo community, I think keeping that active is I would assume probably one of the most important groups, right? Because that's continuity as far as future, competitors, right? Because most competitors at the elite level seem to have started at a young age. It's a long-term investment, right? And that applies to other amateur sports. I know I'm generalizing, but I want to jump to another topic that you mentioned about.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
once that comes, since you just mentioned the youth, so yes, the youth do become our national team most of the time. So very few adults come in mid-20s or early 20s and then go on to be national team members or Olympians or Paralympians. It does happen. Our current Paralympian Priscilla Gagne, she came into judo in her mid-20s, and she's now ranked, she was ranked #1 in the world. She now bounces between being ranked #1 in the world and ranked #2 in the world. So it does happen.
Right.
But the majority of our athletes that get to the elite stage start in their teens. But when we're talking about a dojo and a demographics for finances, if I can use the term bread and butter,
Right.
the children's class, the 6 to 11-year-old class is where most dojos make their money, if we're going to use those phrases.
For sure.
Those are the students that you get large volume of. They're there because their parents put them in the sport. Some of them may choose it on their own, but the majority, their parents put them in there for physical activity, for the rough housing, for the all the stuff that a child needs for their development. So, and to do it in a very safe and structured environment. So that's the class that most clubs make their money on, and those are the classes that are not being allowed right now under Judo Ontario guidelines.
Right.
So under judo, so we're not allowed to have the 6 to 12-year-old. It's a 6 to 11-year-old class right now. So, but not being able to have that class or those classes, because we'd have to have multiple of them with only 9 students allowed on the mat. We'd have to have multiple classes of that. With not being allowed to have those classes, that is really impacting dojos financially across Ontario. Other provincial organizations, other provincial judo organizations have very similar guidelines in place because they've taken it from the overall general guideline from Judo Canada. So none of these classes are being held anywhere. And so most jurisdictions are not having any children's classes. So by not having them, these dojos are being impacted, and that is really hurting their bottom line. So I just, since you brought that up, I wanted to just reiterate that, yeah, that's the thing that's probably hurting clubs the most, is not having that demographic in the club.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think it applies, of course, to other martial arts as well in the community. I think that demographic is certainly a very, very important one business wise. Now, you mentioned before international judo competition. The national team, the Canadian team. What would you say some of their challenges are in terms of in comparison to other countries that are already attending international training camps and are carrying on as if this pandemic is not really here? What advice, if any, would you give to these athletes? Because I'm going to imagine that psychologically that can kind of, these are all very competitive people, and right. And if they know that their competitors are out there training with others at the highest level, what sort of advantages that might give them, because now they're able to still remain in peak condition on all aspects of their game. What advice would you give them in this scenario?
Well, first off, I wouldn't give our national team any advice. Our national team is headed by one of the most competent CEOs in any of the national sporting organizations, in Nicholas Gill. Our coaches are phenomenal at the national level. Um, so I wouldn't dare give our athletes any advice. They're getting the best advice, the best guidance, the best direction. Uh, I would say from any teams anywhere in the world. So I wouldn't give them any advice on that, but I will speak to some of the hardships that they are having. So we don't have a very large um, Olympic team. We have uh, what I mean by that is we have the 14 divisions, and we have athletes in every one of those 14 divisions that are striving to make the Olympics. But a lot of other countries not only have those 14 athletes, but they have 50 or 60 other athletes that are at their peak level that are training with those athletes. Our national athlete bubble is a little bit smaller than that. It's those Olympic track athletes, and what I mean by track is not athletic track. It's an actual there. This is the straight line to Tokyo next summer for these athletes. So these are the ones that are designated with the best chance, that are either qualified or are in striking distance to qualify. So they've been put into a sort of bubble, and some training partners have been put in that bubble with them so that they can train, compete, and get to that goal, which is Tokyo next summer. But other countries have not only that bubble, but their bubble is so much larger that the variety of athletes that they're getting to do Randori against, to do high level training with and against, is huge. And in Canada, we don't have that. Even at the best of times, pre-pandemic, we don't have the same number of athletes training at the National Training Center as other countries do. So once the pandemic hit and our athletes bubble got much smaller, they've lost a lot of just already they're behind the eight ball, and now they're getting either further behind the eight ball. And in Europe and in Asia, these athletes are training with each other. They're crossing the borders to train with each other. They're you can see it online. There's huge training events happening that are just insane, in my opinion, because of the pandemic. But other countries are treating as if business as usual. Canada is not. Um, Canada is only traveling for events that are qualification events, and only sending those athletes that are on that direct path to qualify for Tokyo. Uh, and this is because they have the health and safety of our athletes first and foremost. So yeah, it's really I without a doubt I can say it's affecting our national team at a physical and mental level. But again, they do have the best personnel working with them to keep them in great physical shape, to ensure that they stay in the best judo shape they can, and to give them all the advantages that is possible under the restrictions that they're under. But I do feel for our national team right now. But we do have a phenomenal team of athletes. They're very strong. They're very motivated. We have a current world champion among them. So, and Olympic medalist. And I feel that they're going to come out of this very strong.
For sure. And the question of course they have a great team, support staff, coaches, administrators, and so on. I think I meant more like, psychologically knowing that, you know what I mean? Like knowing that your competitors are training. How does one kind of retain that sense of quote unquote normalcy and sense of because that there's an advantage to that, right? And I mean, maybe we don't have time to get into the psychology of this, but I do want to explore some of these other
Well,
topics in future
I'm
episodes.
so,
Right, go ahead.
I'm certain that I know for a fact that they're all working with sports psychologists,
Right.
And the coaches are putting them through drills and simulations as if they're um, at competition. So even with the limited number of partners they have, I feel that the coaches are coming up with new and unique training drills, strategies, and because again, this is new for everybody,
Right.
but you could treat this as if an athlete is just coming off an injury and has been off for a certain length of time. How would you prepare them for a competition in a very short order for them to give the greatest success? And I'm sure the coaches are treating this as if, okay, this is our limited abilities right now. This is what we have to work with. So I'm pretty sure that with the coaching staff that is there, and the trainers and the physical therapist and the mental psychologist, I'm certain that they're preparing these athletes to compete with these other countries that are treating this as if it's no big deal. Um, I have a feeling that Canadian athletes are going to surprise a lot of people at some of these Grand Slams that they do attend. And I do believe there's one in Budapest coming up that the International Judo Federation has announced earlier this week, that there will be a Grand Prix or up this month in Budapest. So I'm pretty sure our Canadian athletes are going to surprise a number of these fighters there.
For sure. I mean, they've galvanized such momentum, and I think Canadians across the country are hoping the best for them moving forward to 2021. Now, Tony, where can judo players find more information on COVID-19 safety guidelines and so on? Where does one go to find information?
So Judo Canada actually has a whole section of their website set up for COVID-19. Within there, there's the guidelines for dojos. There's safety tips and best practices for athletes. There's also some training information for senseis trying to put a lesson plan together. Judo Quebec has some great information on their website and some videos on lesson plans. Judo BC has put out a couple of training videos. Judo Ontario has information on their website as well. So I mean, all the provincial judo associations have information on their websites. The national one, Judo Canada, has it as well, and different provinces that put out different training videos and suggestions on what to do during class. I would encourage all dojo shoes, all senseis to go to the resource of Judo Canada first, and then the provincial association, and then from there take those guidelines and to modify them to fit into their dojo setting. So if your dojo is small, then you may not be able to have 9 students. If you have a much larger dojo and your local health authority has not restricted you, you may be able to have more than 9 students. Our dojo is actually large enough to have more than 9 students under Judo Ontario's guidelines, but under the Ottawa health restrictions right now, we are limited to 10 people in that space. So you have to modify these guidelines to fit your dojo. There are some things in the guidelines that are optional and some things that are mandatory. For instance, in the Judo Ontario guidelines, it's mandatory to wear a mask into the dojo, but once on the mat in your little 3 by 6 foot area, masks become optional. At our dojo, a mask is mandatory from the minute you come into the dojo to the minute you leave the dojo. And that was just a decision made by the senseis at our dojo for the greatest mitigation of risk.
Now, I have one last question to ask you, and it's not a serious one. I realize that COVID-19 is obviously an extremely serious scenario. It's impacted everyone's lives. But since we're talking about judo, I was wondering, okay, like let's say COVID-19 was a judo competitor. Which throw would you use and which submission would you use? Please entertain us with a spin on this Tony versus COVID-19 in a judo match. Which throw and why? Which submission and why? I realize it's a serious subject. I'm not trying to make light of it, folks, but we're talking combat sports here. So,
You've known me for a very long time, so you know there's only one throw I would do on it, and that would be makikomi.
Nice.
Um, the throw that I'm known for. Most people would ask me why I wouldn't pick it up and slam it in uranage like I did to that 400 pounder in London back in 2012. But I would just say that I wouldn't want to wrap my arms around COVID and get that close to it. But I would definitely use the throw that I'm most known for, and do soto makikomi and just slam it. But I did want to say one more thing before we wrap up. It's very important to me, since I represent para athletes in Canada. Way back in March, when the pandemic first hit, the Canadian Paralympic Committee Athletes Council and the Canadian Olympic Committee Athletes Council, led by Shea Smith, got together and discussed the pandemic and how it was affecting our athletes, and what the problem with going to Tokyo in the summer of 2020 would have been. We recommended to our prospective board of directors. I recommended to the Canadian Paralympic Committee board of directors, and Shea Smith recommended to the Canadian Olympic Committee board of directors to not send a team to Tokyo 2020. And the board of directors of both organizations actually took our recommendations to heart, and decided that Canada would not send a team to Tokyo 2020. A week after we made this decision, the International Olympic Committee and International Paralympic Committee postponed the Olympics and Paralympics for 1 year. So I just want to say that I'm very glad, and I'm very humbled that the CPC and the COC actually stood up to their mandate, which was athlete centric, athlete first, and they didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk, and I'd like to thank them for that, for having athletes first. And now that there's a year till the games, or actually now 10 months until the games, there's enough time to ensure safety of our athletes, to make sure that protocols are in place next summer. So I think we're going to really field an amazing Olympic and Paralympic team for Canada next summer in all sports.
That's an excellent point. Thank you very much for mentioning that to us, Tony. And thank you very much for your time in this episode here. We look forward to having you again down the road, because there's obviously so much more to talk about. So thank you very much, Tony, and stay safe.
You too. My pleasure.